Hello, my name is Adam. This is a video about a very common problem, complaint. A lot of students say, I just can't speak in English. Um, and the problem of not being able to speak in English when you know an awful lot of English is exactly how many students feel. For me, though, unfortunately, the majority of then teachers turn around and say, look, just be patient, keep practicing. It's a question of time. Keep going. Try to speak, don't worry about this. It will come with time. And I kind of don't like that kind of answer. I don't like when you say, well, all I'm going to tell you is, oh, just don't worry. It's going to just disappear. I think that we can always find something more precise to attack and have short-term goals and really look deeper into the problem than just think it's just a question of quantity over time. Now, so I think about all my students. I found there really 7 common problems, and I'm going to present solutions to those problems that maybe you can look at starting almost immediately. So the first typical problem is fishing with no hook. So the problem here is that you feel your brain just goes blank. And I don't mean blank as like the way the meditation teacher wants you to go blank. You are blank, you don't know what you want to say. You just can't come out. You know that there's something you want to say, it's just not coming. And I think one of the problems here is you haven't learnt, or you haven't really practiced enough that first hook into your idea, that first sentence that we use very naturally to get an idea going. So, for example, phrases like, well, or for example, I think, well, yes, you could say that, but I disagree with a couple of points there. All these type of phrases will start your brain and contact you into what you want to say. And that, if you think about it in a way, these don't say much, but they do reflect your feeling about what you want to say. And in connecting with your feeling, something which you haven't yet verbalized, because often we don't verbalize until we say it, you're expressing your feeling, then you can feel easier. You can feel what the idea is and bring it out. Okay, so how can we fix this very common problem? Well, firstly, is learning some more beginning opening phrases. These type of things you use in your native language. How many do you use in English? How often do you just say something before you start speaking in English? Okay, and the second thing is, once you've learned some of these phrases and all the different ways to express emotions, could be positive, negative, could be a bit confusion, could be to say, oh, that's a bit complicated, really. Well, then worry, then what's next? So you just practice that first answer. Let's see what happens next, okay? The second very common problem that you might have when you can't speak English is that actually you are speaking, but you feel that you're jumping and not dancing. So you pause a lot, you think things are not very fluent. And the problem here is very similar to the first problem, but you're not using the linking language to help you speak. This linking language not only will grab the next idea, like fishing with no hook, it's going to help the listener. So linking language, there are lots and lots, things like because, and, very common ones. But on the other hand, and secondly, while at the same time, I think, okay, so there's another common problem, and it's to do again with learning some of these basic phrases at the beginning, okay? And these phrases are actually very useful, not only for you as the speaker, but for the listener. And I call this driving the bus. In other words, as the person is speaking, you are telling them what's going to happen next. You're about to disagree. You're about to give them extra information, all these different things. So you're helping the person listen and follow your main ideas. So it's really important. So we use it in language all the time. Maybe 30, 40, 50% of language is linking language, not saying what you feel or your ideas. So learn some of these phrases, okay? What you need to do now maybe is just practice speaking without saying anything important. A bit like a politician. I'll give you an example. I'll try to think of an example now. Yes, that's a very interesting point. And I think if we look from both sides at this argument and we take a step back and we look to give a good summary about the feelings that someone, might feel in, looking back at this situation from both sides of the argument, we could come to the conclusion that that's very difficult. But if you just, when you're speaking, focus on this kind of linking language rather than here's my point, try and make a connection, try and make another connection, and maybe practice small points in between. Okay. The third possible problem and some solutions is teaching yourself surgery. The problem here is that you're basically trying to create the rules yourself. Okay, now, but the rules already exist. Now, there are two versions of this possibility. One is that you're trying to create actual grammar rules. You really don't have enough experience of the language itself. You're literally trying to translate from your native language into English. The second one is that you're fairly good with grammar, but you actually don't have the rules of conversation. You haven't experienced enough conversation. So your English is based around grammar, textbooks, the occasional pretend dialogue in a book, but really you haven't experienced conversation. So all the language that we use in a conversation, you haven't experienced enough for you to absorb it. So what you're doing is you're recreating the language just from grammar. Now, this is a bit like thinking, oh, well, I've seen a photo of lasagna. I can make a lasagna. No, you really have to experience it. So what I recommend here is to go in, look at these, find some dialogues, look at some films, and almost not necessarily memorize, but really follow the dialogue. Notice carefully how they ask questions, how people receive answers, move the conversation forward. That's something you could definitely look at. Really just learn and experience more of what actual conversations are rather than trying to invent the way that we have conversations. Fourth, biting a watermelon. So this is when you have lots to say, but you don't have much structure to talk about it. So this is where you don't know where to begin, how to attack the ideas in your head. You have lots to say. So this is a bit different than jumping and not dancing, where the person is a bit stressed about what's going to come next, the exact phrase. This person could be worried about this, but there's also a feeling of like, where do I begin? How on earth can I talk about all these ideas I have to talk about? And the problem here is a little bit about structuring their information, okay? And there are many options about how you can improve your structuring. For example, I think if you were to write down, so to practice this, if you were to write down the ideas that you want to talk about in a piece of paper, and then have arrows going between them, on those arrows, write down the language that you would move from one to the other. So this is a type of jumping, not dancing. But also when you practice the structuring, have a start to learn some phrases that you can use at the beginning of your longer monologue or your longer turn. And some examples I've got written down here would include things like, okay, well, I think there are a number of things we have to consider here. So here you're making a list, you're preparing the person, preparing yourself to talk about a number of different ideas. Yes, I see some pros and cons here. So now the structure of your ideas, you've got these advantages and disadvantages. You're going to talk about these two elements. So talk about the pros first. You've got some structure behind your idea. You can then start to move easier, okay, and attack this watermelon. Another option, if you're telling a story, something like, well, it's quite a complicated story. Let me begin with some context, or let me begin at the beginning, or let me just tell you briefly what happens. These type of expressions, if that's your problem, can really help you just to start and then look to move carefully between ideas using a superstructure. Going to number 5 now. A little bit different here. This is called watching the stairs. Here you are focused too much on your errors. Your problem here is you have a fear of your own ability and your fear of what really is your skill in talking. And whenever we concentrate too much on the stairs that we're going down while we are walking down the stairs, we risk falling down. And this is what's happening. It happens if you're driving, many, many other things in life. You need to do it without thinking. You need to trust yourself that you can do this, okay? So the student is concentrating too much. They're thinking much more about the technical nature, about the grammar, the pronunciation. They're thinking as well about what they just said. Is it correct? They're often the type of person who corrects themselves as well. And then the correction will actually be wrong, but the original was right many times. Either way, all this way of communicating is a bad way of communicating. Thinking too much about the grammar elements or the pronunciation errors are not going to help the person listening to you. Unless, of course, they then reply, I don't understand. Try again. Okay, think about what you just said in that case. But when you're talking, concentrate on the other person. Don't concentrate on what you are saying. Okay, so how can we help with this problem? Well, it's possibly the easiest, possibly the most difficult problem to solve. The problem is you. Basically, you would need to practice talking without caring. You don't necessarily need a teacher for this. You can possibly use a mirror or just walking around to just the idea of just output. Don't worry about what you're saying. Don't judge what you're saying. A teacher could be useful if the teacher is aware and you inform them that you're really aiming to build confidence, not trying to find errors or reaching sort of perfection. Okay, and then the teacher can really help you. And then by replying to you afterwards about how good you actually were, let the teacher judge you and get confidence from the teacher's ability to say, well, look, that was really, really good. You're worrying about something which really isn't a problem, but you could also look at this area, just to say. Number 6, the 6th possible issue here is calling your lawyer. Delaying your speech and then losing your turn, okay? So this is when you focus too much on what you want to say. You're filtering the content too much. And this is disrupting your fluency. And you're trying to get a lot of control, and while the other people are kind of freestyling. Obviously, in real life, that could be a good idea. You don't want to just say anything like that. So if you're trying to be precise and think about what you're saying, this is probably okay. But if this is happening to you in social situations where conversations happen, you wanted to say something, you just didn't get the chance, then this is maybe something for you to think about. Maybe it's not about necessarily your English itself. It's just you trying to arrive and be perfect and will not worry too much. So to filter less what you're saying and just enter the conversation, trust yourself a bit more. So how on earth could you stop this? Well, I think there's a couple of things you can do. One is using your body in many situations. Raise your hand and say, oh, just a minute. Or like, oh, can I just say something? Give yourself a little bit of time to think about what you want to say. You can always do this with language or body and not say something. For example, oh, could you just, oh, no, it doesn't matter. Okay? Oh, it doesn't matter. It's okay. It's not a problem. So learn some phrases like that. Some like, well, oh, hold on. Can I just think about, no, actually, no, it's okay. I think I understand. Sorry. Phrases like, well, if I could just say something about this. Yeah, I'm wondering, and I could be wrong, but okay. This type of language will allow you to enter in it and give yourself just a little bit of time maybe to double check if you're worried about what you're saying all the time, and to start trusting yourself as well. Last one, juggling with 5 knives. You are basically trying to improve everything at once, and you just feel confused about what you want to do. So the problem here is that you're never giving yourself the chance to practice talking either in a learning environment or an environment where you can just concentrate on one thing at a time. You're trying to go out there into conversations and perform at a really high level. One problem to appreciate about having conversations is that we don't really think about speaking when we're talking our native language. Just kind of all happens all the time. But then we actually look at when we write, even in our native language, we see that we approach it in a different way. We think about the idea we're going to say, we start to structure and we plan out some of the ideas. We then write a little bit of the sentences to express ourselves. We rewrite it. We go back to what we said before. We check for errors. It's a completely different way when we write something. But when we're speaking, it's like everything happens at once, and we imitate that. But that's very difficult to imitate in a foreign language. So in order to perform better, it could be a case of actually going into the different steps of speaking and improving each part rather than try to improve everything all at once and basically improve nothing. And the idea here is a bit like juggling. So I say, well, don't begin with 5 knives. Begin with balls, and then begin with 2 balls, and 3 balls, and then 4 balls, then 5 balls, and then 5 knives, okay? Make it easier for you to keep going and improving. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of pressure. So a good idea, how to deal with this, a good idea here, rather, is to go back to the 6 previous solutions. Find out where you are. Maybe you thought, oh, that's me. Okay, well, choose one of those areas. Choose one that's creating the most amount of problems. Go and fix that problem. Don't worry about the other elements or even problems that are kind of connected, like pronunciation or maybe even grammar or these things. Try and solve these speaking problems, resolve one, improve one, and then go on to a second one afterwards. Great. I hope this gave you some ideas about how you could start improving and speaking more in English. Thank you very much. See you in the next video.